and have some time with the family before they go back to school. And she spoke on the fruits of the Spirit, which are so important in our lives, and we all need to grow in constantly. And I've been doing personally a series that's kind of for myself, really. I've done it on my own, not as part of the preaching team and ministry team, but just something I felt that was needed. And we've been looking at moments. And we've looked at moments in the Bible, and it's going to come up on the screen. We've looked at moments of opportunity, like Bartimaeus when he reached out and took the opportunity before Jesus passed by to get a healing and change his destiny. We've looked at moments of breakthrough, where Joshua brought down the walls of Jericho and took the city, and we saw what that means. And so this morning, I want to continue in this series, and I want to continue in a series and talk about a moment of despair. A moment of despair. I'm sure that we can all, if we went around and had a chat this morning and talked about our lives, there are moments in our lives that where we felt overwhelmed. There are moments in our lives where we felt we couldn't cope. There are moments in our lives where we felt everything seems to have fallen apart, and it's difficult, and it's hard. And we want to be honest about that. And my purpose as a pastor of Hope Church is to create a safe place. Create a culture of compassion, where anyone and everyone can come and feel that it's okay to not be okay. Is that good? Because I think that's so important. The church hasn't always been great at this. The church hasn't always kind of realized the importance of wholeness and well-being. We haven't always understood that Jesus died for the whole of our person, body, mind, soul, and spirit. We've forgotten about the fact that it's important about our emotions and our soul and our well-being and our thoughts. And sometimes we've been judgmental and critical and insensitive to that. One lady wrote in an article called Proverbs and Prozac. She said, I attended my small church Bible study, and the subject of depression came up. And the lady who was leading that small group had been in the church many, many years. And her response was, if you're a true Christian, you should never be depressed. You should never need antidepressants. All you need is Jesus. I thank God that he's delivered us from that kind of thinking. Because that's not true. That's not a reality. And sadly, that's what people believed and promoted. But I thank God that we're in a new day and a new season where people understand about mental health, where people understand that healing can be divine and instant, but it also can be slow and progressive. That not everything happens overnight. Thank God for when God miraculously moves, and we believe in that. But I also thank God that he gives you the strength to face each day. You've won a battle this morning just by being here. And I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know how you got out of bed this morning and what you were facing and how you felt. But you've won a battle just by being here. And we want to thank you for being here this morning and being courageous enough to do that, because we know that not for everyone that's easy. Not for everyone that's something they can do without thinking. It takes courage and strength. But we want you to know that Christians do get depressed, and it doesn't make you a bad Christian. The Christians do need tablets and do need to go to the doctor and get help, that sometimes it is a chemical imbalance. We thank God for Jesus and all that he's done, but we know that sometimes we need help and counseling and strength as well, and that's okay. And I want you to know that. So if you've had a bad experience in church, I'm sorry. But my prayer is that you won't have a bad experience in this church, that we would create that culture of compassion, that we would not judge people, not criticize people, but remember that everyone is fighting a battle. There is things going on, that we are complicated people. Our brains, our minds, our hearts are complex. And life is complex. And so sometimes the things we say can be so insensitive because we can dismiss things as if it's as simple as that. And I've found that the people who do that usually have more compassion when it's them. Have you noticed that? They're very harsh with others, but when it comes to them, everyone must understand how much they're hurting. But may we have the same allowance for each other. So I want to speak to you on a great man of God called Elijah. He's so great, we name our kids after him. Stacy. We love him. We love all that he's done. We love the stories of Elijah, how he resurrects a young boy, how he's fed by ravens, how he sees the miraculous happen and God's anointing and this man of God. But I want to show you his humanity this morning, that even great men of God can suffer greatly and have times of despair. So if you have a Bible with you, turn to chapter 19 of 1 Kings. And as you turn in there, let me give you a bit of background. In chapter 18, we all know the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. He calls for a showdown. He asks for the prophets of Baal to come because Ahab the king has married Jezebel, and Jezebel worships Baal. And so she set up her own prophets, and she's bringing this idolatry into God's kingdom, into Israel. And so Elijah's had enough, and he says, okay, let's settle this once and for all. If I'm the true prophet of God, then I'll set up an altar, and if you're the true prophets of Baal, you set up an altar, and we'll see which God answers. And so in chapter 18 we have this big showdown, and we know that the God of Elijah answers by fire. Fire falls from heaven, consumes the sacrifice. The people turn to God and realize he's the true and living God. The prophets of Baal are slaughtered, and the matter is settled. Now, when that happens, if it was me, I would be on a high for months. That would be so exciting. Fire falling from heaven, God proving himself, that he is the true and living God, that I am his prophet. You can imagine people turning to God. It's almost like revival. God is just in the midst, his presence of doing that. They could still smell the smoke of the burnt offering. And so for me, I would be on a high for months. And for Elijah, you would think this is such a great moment. This is going to change everything. But then you step into chapter 19 and you're shocked by the words that we read. And let's read it together. It's going to come up on the screen. It says, when Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword, she repented and turned to God. No, she didn't, did she? She didn't do that. That's what we expect to read. She says, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of those. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Wow. That's not what you expect to read after a great victory, when fire has come down from heaven and you saw God move powerfully. It's not the next thing you expect to read about Elijah, but we do. Because that's our humanity. That's the reality. And I believe God puts it there so we can relate to that and understand that even in the midst of God doing great things and men being great in their exploits and seeing great victories, there are still moments and times of despair that overwhelm and overcome all that we do. I want to say to you this morning, if you suffer with anxiety, depression, mental health problems, your emotional well-being, you are in good company this morning. You're in good company, because so did many of the people in the Bible. Jonah, in chapter 4, verse 3 says, take away my life. It is better for me to die than to live. We read about David in Psalm 13. I'm hurting, Lord, he says. Oh, will you forget me forever? How much longer, Lord, will you look the other way when I'm in need? How much longer must I cling to this constant grief? I've endured this shaking of my soul. The Apostle Paul says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experience in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Great men of God achieved great things, but also experienced great suffering and anxiety. I've just got a quote by here from Charles Spurgeon that's going to come up on the screen. He wrestled with depression. This great prince of preachers who had 10,000 people coming out every week to his services. They had to build him an auditorium to accommodate the revival that he was seeing. 10,000 people. But this is what he said. Fits of depression come over the most of us. Usually cheerful as we may be, we are at intervals cast down. The strong are not always vigorous. The wise are not always ready. The brave are not always courageous. And the joyous are not always happy. I love the brutal honesty of that. And I'm saying these things because I want you to know that victorious Christian living is not having no problems. It's having the strength to overcome and get through and keep going. You will have problems. You will wrestle with these things. And you may wrestle for a long time. And there's no easy answer for some of these things. But you're not alone. You're not the only one going through it. You're not a bad Christian, a bad person. God isn't unhappy with you. You haven't brought this on yourself. You don't lack faith. It's just part of life and what we go through in a fallen world. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world and everything changed. And so we struggle. But it's okay, because this is a safe place to struggle. And we all do. And the last thing we want to do, and this is kind of ironic, the last thing we want to do is wear masks. But you understand what I'm saying. The last thing we want to do is wear masks. And we've done that for so long. We turn up on a Sunday and people say, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. Are you really? Are you really great? But you've been made to feel that way. That's victorious Christian living, isn't it? But it's not. Because inside you're hurting and struggling. And I think we need to create that place where we can come back to. What happened with Elijah? Why did he go from a moment of high to such a moment of low so quickly? What was his trigger? Well, we know it was Jezebel and the message she sent and the threat she put on him. But it's interesting that he can stand before 400 prophets of Baal and not fear. And yet one message from one woman caused him to run. Isn't that strange? How quickly we can go from a moment of high to a moment of low. And I think it's important in church life that we understand that. And I just want to kind of focus in on that for a moment, because I find that sometimes in church life we pursue those spiritual highs. If you understand what I mean, where we pursue those things that make us feel good and lift us up as if they are what true joy is all about. And it's not. It's sometimes just a passing emotion. And I thank God for those times where we experience and worship God's presence and God's glory, and he just lifts us and encourages us. But don't chase after those emotional, spiritual highs. You know, I know people who go from church to church. Wherever the new thing is happening, they've got to be there. Wherever the new conference is, they've got to be there. All of this, you know, there's a revival here, and they travel thousands of miles. They'll go to Florida and Pensacola and Toronto and all of it, and they're chasing these things all over the place. As if the God of Canada is better than the God of Wales. And we chase these emotional highs. And what we do is we move from that emotional high, and once it passes, we go back again to the way we were. And we have these spiritual lows and spiritual depression. Because that's not true joy. True joy is found in Christ, in who he is, who he's made us to be, in spending time with him. He's a lot closer than Canada. He's a lot closer than chasing it in the next conference. But know your triggers. Know what causes you to react that way. You know from past messages that I've said to you that I'm someone who struggles with anxiety. And still do. I've prayed for God to heal me. It hasn't happened yet. But he's given me the strength to cope. Just this morning, coming here this morning, I said to Helen, I'm struggling a little bit. I'll be honest with you, and maybe that'll help you feel freer this morning. Because I haven't got it all together either. And there's a lot of Sundays when I turn up and I'm struggling, to be honest. And I'm not afraid to be vulnerable before you. You can judge me for that. You can criticize me for that. That's okay. I can live with that. What I can't live with is pretending and hiding. But I struggle with that. But by the grace of God, I cope. And God helps me. But what I've learned to discover is the triggers. And for me, some of the triggers is this: procrastination and pressure. If I put things off for too long, I can feel the panic rise. If by Friday I haven't wrote my sermon, I'm hitting the panic button. The kids can't look at me. My wife stays out of the way. Because I'm on edge. So for me, I've learned that, because some people say, oh, pastors should take a Monday off. That's the worst thing in the world for me. Have a Monday off, because Sunday's been so busy, take a Monday off. I can't do that. I'd rather take a Friday and a Saturday off, because everything's done for me. If I take a Monday off, I don't enjoy it. All I do is spend the whole day thinking about what I've got to do. That's me. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. If it works for you, brilliant. Laugh your socks off, do whatever you want. But it doesn't work for me, because it builds pressure. And so I've noticed it triggers me a pressure. I'm putting things off. When I see that to-do list getting bigger instead of smaller, it doesn't help. And so there are certain things that I have to remove myself from or put in place to help me cope with that. And you have to learn to do that. Maybe for you it's a relationship that's turned toxic that you need to remove yourself from a little bit. Maybe you need to switch the news off because it's depressing you too much. Simple things that need to be put in place. Maybe it's habits that are not healthy. Maybe it's changing your diet. Maybe it's changing the way you eat. Maybe it's going out for a walk more regularly, getting some fresh air. Maybe it's reconnecting with people. Changing some things that help you so that they don't trigger that fear and that anxiety in you. And so I want to encourage you to look at your life. Take time to think, what causes that? What causes that for me to respond in that way? Is there anything I can do to help myself to make that better? I've done that, and I've had to continue to do that. One of the things I've learned to do is sometimes to say no to things, because I was always someone who would always want to say yes. Yeah, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. And I was in a meeting a few weeks ago, and we were planning this Kingdom Come event. And the question was asked, well, who's going to organise it? And I said, not me. I said, please don't ask me. I've got so much to do at the moment. I just can't do this at the moment. So the guy said, no problem. And so they organised. I said, I'll be part of it. I'll support it. I'll pray. I'll do anything I can, but please. And sometimes you have to say that, no. And no is okay to do that, because you have to prioritise other things. And I knew it would have been too much. And sometimes you have to learn to say that. That someone will say, do you want to do this? Do you want to go there? And you just have to say, no, I just can't. Not today. Perhaps another time. And that's okay. Learn to identify your personal triggers. It says Elijah ran for his life from one message from Jezebel. And what I want to do, I've split this message into two. So next week, Anthony's speaking, which is brilliant. And we're looking forward to that. He's hiding his face at the moment, but he's speaking. And then the week after, we're going to come back to this story. He's building up to it. We're going to come back to this story and split it into two parts. Because what I want to look at is the do's and don'ts of when we're facing anxiety and despair and stress. And so I didn't want to cover it all in one message because it would be far too long and far too much. So this week I'm going to cover the don'ts. What we don't do, what we shouldn't do. And then the week after next, we're going to come back and see what we should do from the life of Elijah. So the first thing I want to show you is don't run away. As soon as he received this message, I would have thought he would have stood and fought with boldness. You know, to me, I thought his response would be, well, God is great, God is mighty, he just proved himself, he calls fire from heaven. I've got nothing to fear. I expect him to say, bring it on, Jezebel. Do your worst. I'm not afraid. But he doesn't. He ran for his life. And so often in church life we do that. When we're struggling, whether it's with sin or fear or anxiety, the natural instinct is to run. It's called the flight or fight response. You know, when we're in a situation that is stressful and threatening and we're afraid, the fear triggers anxiety, and the anxiety, you either fight or you flight. And normally we just run away, and I've noticed a lot of Christians do that. And sometimes they say to me, oh, I couldn't come to church because of this. And sometimes I think, perhaps it would have been better if you came to church because of that. No, yeah, I get that sometimes you can't, and you can't be here, and you need that time, I get that. But I think sometimes it would have helped you to be in that environment instead of pulling yourself away and running away from it. We can't always run from our fears. People say, oh, you know, I'll be okay when I can buy my house by the beach. When I can find my retreat. And what I've found is that no matter where you are, your feelings go with you, your emotions go with you. So you can buy a house by the beach. I would love to live by the beach. But it won't cure my anxiety, because even beach houses have problems. Even the beach life has problems and difficulties and trials. And my life by the beach isn't going to cure that. It might be a nice view, it might bring some sort of calm and peace for a while, but it's not going to cure what's inside, because the problem isn't external, it's internal. And what we are doing is removing the external things. If only I lived this way, if only I had this kind of lifestyle, if I only had this more money, if I only had this. And we make it all external, and we change things and circumstances and situation, and then we find that we're back to the same place. You know, I often say to people, if you've been to 5 churches and you can't find a good one, maybe you need to look at yourself. Isn't that true? Because some people move around churches and they say, you know what, every church I go to, Nobody seems to like me. Everybody has an issue with me. And I think at some point you've got to say, well, okay, maybe you need to look closer to home. Maybe that's where the problem lies. And so don't run away from these things. When you're feeling fear and anxiety and depression, don't run. Or if you're going to run, run to God. Run to his presence. And we want to create that culture that you can come here however you feel. I don't care if you're on a spiritual high or a spiritual low. I don't care if you're broken or you're feeling revival. I don't care if you're excited and passionate or you're depressed and discouraged. Church is for everyone to do life together. I said to someone the other week, no one has ever been helped by being rejected. And that's the truth. We don't want to reject people. We don't want to make people feel like they can't be here if they're not on their best behavior. Church is meant to be a place as a refuge for the broken and the hurting. What did Jesus say? What does the Bible say in the Old Testament? God is near to the brokenhearted. And church has to reflect that. So don't run. The second thing that Elijah did, that he made a mistake, is he isolated himself. Listen to verses 3 and 4. It says, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. In a moment of discouragement and despair, why on earth would you leave someone who's been by your side for so long? Why would you separate yourself from someone who knows you and you know them? This is a time where he needed someone around him, people to help him and encourage him. But instead, he separated himself and went a day's journey into the wilderness. And I think what we've done is mistaken isolation for solitude. Because at the beginning of Elijah's life, God led him into the wilderness for solitude. Now he is leading himself into the wilderness for isolation. That's different. And so don't hide isolation under the covering of solitude. They're not the same thing and they will not help you. Separating from people is not the same as having solitude with God. Solitude is meant to create intimacy so that you spend time with God in his presence, so that you get to know him better, so that there's that intimacy and that relationship. That's solitude. Isolation is cutting people off, saying, I don't want people to get close to me. I want to be on my own. But nothing on its own has ever got better. You take a plant and you put it on your windowsill and leave it. Don't water it. Don't give it any light, and see what happens to that plant, how it will deteriorate without any source of help or nourishment. But that's what we do so often when we go into isolation and we say, I just don't want to be with people. And I know there are times like that, and perhaps you've got to gather your thoughts, and I'm not saying that there are times where you need to step back. But I'm talking about periods, long periods of isolation, of pulling away and cutting yourself off. We were created for community. We were created for fellowship and relationship. It was God who said it is not good for man to be alone. He wasn't alone. He had God. He had the angels. He had all the earth. He had the animals. He had creation. But he was speaking about something specific. He needed someone like him. He needed Eve to complete him and to help him and encourage him and bless him. It's not good for man to be alone. And it's the same thing that applies to us. We need each other. Don't run to the wilderness. Don't run to that place that is barren and a place of lack and a place that is dying. Very few things grow in the wilderness. If God leads you there, then he'll use it to increase you, make you fruitful. It can be a training ground where God blesses us and helps us. But that's when God leads us there. But when we run there like Elijah did, and we leave everyone behind, it's going to be a place of despair and continued discouragement. I know you're in very many amens this morning. I know you're going to quiet. But this is real stuff, isn't it? And this is what we do. This is what we do because I know, because I've done it. And I've been there. I know what that's like. And we have to fight for that. We have to fight to be here on a Sunday. We have to fight to make those relationships and those friendships. We have to fight to connect and not stay in isolation. I know what that feels like. But we have to fight for that. It didn't help Elijah, and it won't help us. The third thing he did, I want to show you this morning, is he played the comparison game. Listen to what it says in verse 4. It says that he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord. How many of us have said that this morning? I've had enough. Let's be honest, haven't we? I've had enough of the pain. I've had enough of the suffering. I've had enough of the depression. I've had enough of the cloud that's hanging over my head. I've had enough of the bad news. I've had enough of COVID-19. I've had enough. We've all done it. We've all been there. We've all felt that way. I've had enough. And this is exactly how Elijah felt as he sat there under that tree. The victory of Mount Carmel seemed a long time ago now. And as he sat there discouraged and depressed, he said these unusual words, I am no better than my ancestors. Now what makes it interesting to me is, why did he think he had to be? Isn't that interesting? Why did he think he had to be? Who told him that? Who said he should be? I am no better than my ancestors. A few years ago, I stopped reading leadership books for a period. Now you look at me and think, well, that's strange, Dale. As someone who's involved in leadership regularly, surely that would be a good thing for you. And it was at first, and I've read so many leadership books over the years, and they've been great books and an inspiration to me. But there came a time where I had to stop. Because what I did is start playing the comparison game. And so instead of reading what these great men of God had done, and the churches they'd built, and the ministries they had seen, and the lives they'd been changed, instead of that inspiring me and spurring me on, I started to read these things and look at them and say, my church doesn't look anything like that. My life doesn't look like anything like that. I read some of these guys, and they go to buy a tin of baked beans and someone gets saved. They go out for an haircut and there's revival breaking out. They make one appeal for salvation and the church grows by 1,000 people. And I'm reading all of this, and I thank God for that. I'm not taking away from it. It's not the book fault. It's not the people who wrote them. But I read that, and it instead of inspiring me, it discouraged me. Because I get up on a Monday morning and sometimes nothing happens. I go for an haircut and all I do is get an haircut, and sometimes it's not even a good one. You know what I'm saying? I go to the supermarket and they haven't even got baked beans. Nobody gets saved, nobody gets healed. There's no revival. I make an appeal, nobody responds. The church doesn't grow by 1,000. I'm reading all that, and so I stopped. I just felt that God was saying to me, Dale, you need to stop. And what I did, I switched modes. I didn't stop reading. I carried on reading my Bible and praying and seeking God, but I switched books and started to read devotionals. I started to feed myself on God and Jesus and who he is and what he wants me to do. And then I started to realize that I had played the comparison game. Because God never said I had to be like so-and-so. God never said I had to build a church like them, my ministry had to be like them, my life had to be like. He never said that. All he said was, I want you to make you like Jesus. I want to make you like my son. And so I compared myself to the wrong people, and I started to put pressure on myself. And as I said earlier, pressure is one of my triggers. And so that triggered, and so I stopped. And even now, only recently have I started picking up leadership books. Everybody buys me leadership books, everywhere I go. It's like it doesn't torment me. Every gift I get is a leadership book. And I love them, I really do. But only now I've started to pick them back up again. But I've learned that balance, because I was reading too many, I think, and it was too much of an intake on the wrong subject that sometimes needed to be balanced out. But I want to encourage you to don't compare your life. Because this is what I've learned. That sometimes we see people and all that they are doing and all that their lives are, but we don't see the failures and the struggles and the difficulties. We only see the glory moments, the victories. We see a snapshot. It's a Facebook, an Instagram, a Twitter clip of their life. I've seen photos of couples with their arms around each other standing on the beach and you think, oh, they're so in love. But I know the story behind that is they nearly killed each other the day before. They nearly got a divorce last year. But you see them on a beach holding hands. It looks great, doesn't it? We've been there, we've done that. You can take a snapshot. I can show you photos of me and Helen and my family and things, but behind there there's a story of hurt and brokenness as well. And so I don't want you to compare yourself, because it's not a reality. You don't see everybody's life. You don't see everybody's pain and suffering. And so it's easy to just see the great and the good and the victory and the glory. And then we feel intimidated and we feel inferior. Because the guys who wrote these books and all that God has done, behind that there is also failure and pain and suffering. I remember talking to one guy and he built a great church. And he saw many people come into salvation. But he said this to me, he said, but in the early days, it was so difficult. He said, my wife died in childbirth, and so did my child. He said, they buried across the road in the cemetery opposite the church. He said, and everybody was watching me. He said, the church was growing and thriving, ministries were happening. He said, but I was hurt and broken and devastated. And from the outside, when I looked at the church and looked at him, he said, wow, I'd love to be like him. But I didn't realize he lost his wife and child in childbirth. I didn't see the pain and suffering that he had to go through during that time. And that's the thing. That when we compare with a false reality and a false snapshot of people's lives. You are not meant to be like anybody else. God created you. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. And we have to get comfortable with that. We have to get confident in that. And we have to remember that on a regular basis. Don't let people tell you what you should do. Don't let people tell you how you should do things. Don't tell people tell you how you should feel. Nobody knows. Be confident. Allow God to influence you. Allow God to speak into your life. Allow God to shape and mold you. Don't be a reflection of other people's opinions. You know, one of the things I think the church needs to be delivered from is people possession. Forget demon possession, people possession is the biggest problem. We're so desperate to please people. I hope they like my preaching. I hope they like my songs. I hope they like the service. I hope they like what I hope. And we put ourselves under pressure and we get anxious and we get worried. I hope. People possession, worrying about all of these things. Now we have to care about people and we have to love people. We know that. But I've also discovered you can't please everyone, and no matter what you do, not everybody will be happy with the way you do things and the things you say. And so we have to stop that and be delivered from that and be confident enough to say, you know what, I know who I am, I know what God's called me to be, I know what he's called me to do. And yes, I struggle and I have difficulties and I have moments, but by the grace of God, it's sufficient for me. God said to Paul, I'm not going to remove the thorn in the flesh. My grace is sufficient for you. Maybe my anxiety is my thorn in the flesh. I don't know. Maybe it's God's way of keeping me humble. I don't know. But his grace is sufficient for me. And one day I will get healed. Because Chris said earlier, we're going to go into eternity. We'll have new bodies, celebration, marriage, stuff like that. Everything's going to change. So I have that hope. But while I'm in this earthly body, we will struggle and suffer and have difficulties and challenges. But there are things we can do to help ourselves. And I wanted to talk about this morning because the first step in helping anyone and helping ourselves is to talk about it. If we keep it quiet, then we make it a bigger problem. If we don't talk about these things, then we make it something that we should be ashamed of, that we should hide. But it's not. Mental health, anxiety, depression, moments of despair. The Bible is full of them. The church is full of them. And it's okay not to be okay. We're going to talk about it. It may feel uncomfortable, but we're going to expose the lies of the enemy and allow God to help us. And maybe he'll heal us instantly, or maybe he'll be progressive. Either way, we're going to trust and have faith in God to help us, and we're going to create a culture of compassion. Where it says it's okay for you to be here and struggle and hurt and not have it all together. We're going to create that kind of church as a refuge and as a place where people can come. Amen? So I don't know where this hits you this morning. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you're going through. I don't need to know. But I want you to know that we care and that we love you, and thank you for being here this morning. And we want to pray that God will speak into this. So let's just bow our heads for a moment. And what I'm going to ask you to